Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Africam show. My name's Ben Coley. I'll be looking after you for the next 45 minutes as we visit our various Africam locations in association with explore.org. And as always, it's live, it's interactive. I am here in the e-flesh, I suppose you could say. So please do send in any questions and comments, and I'll be very happy to read them out and hopefully answer any of the questions that do come through. So do get on your keyboards if needs be. But it looks like we've started the afternoon at Tembe Elephant Park down in Maputo land, and we're doing some birding. We've got some what look like yellow-billed storks. It's a good start, and some herons. But yeah, lovely to see a little bit of bird life and a little African jacana in the foreground there as well. One of my favourite birds, the African jacanas, beautiful colours and ridiculously comical clown feet. Their toes are nearly as long as their body. They're not far off, stretching out to around about where the bird's head and beak would be, which of course gives them the ability to seemingly walk on water. Also known as lily trotters because of that. Anywhere where you find the big leaves from the water lilies, you'll see the jacanas scuttling across them, and they seem to be unaffected by the laws of gravity. But that's the benefit of having enormous feet spread out your body weight. And don't forget, birds don't weigh as much as you think. A lot of what you see is feather. I see we've had a few greetings coming in. Always wonderful from here to, to hear from everybody. Namaste Zygote and Amber CO. You've got your coffee in your hand. Well, that is good to know. I have to say I'm being a bit naughty. I have an energy drink in my hand, but that's so I can be all enthusiastic and upbeat for the next 45 minutes. And Peru also saying hi as well. Hello to all of you, and for the rest of you watching. Oh, we've got a little Inyala in the background as well. So certainly the most interesting part of those African jacanas that we can see in the bottom right of the picture now is their breeding strategy. They are one of very, very few birds in the 10,000 or so bird species worldwide. Only about 1% of those 10,000 are what we call polyandrous. So you'll have the female mating with multiple different males, and the males are the ones involved in the incubating of the eggs and the rearing of the young. The female plays no role in the parental care at all. It's entirely left up to the male, and he does an exceptionally good job. I might add as well, he looks after them very, very well, protects them, and I've only ever seen it once. But they do have this habit of if the chicks are out and about and the male wants to rush them to safety, he will tuck them under his wings and sort of close his arms around them so they're stuck up in his armpit somewhere. And he picks them up and he runs around with them dangling from his armpits. And sometimes you can see these little legs hanging out from under his wings. It's all rather comical. It seems to be a relatively quiet afternoon at the moment at Tembe. Of course, this time of afternoon we'd normally expect to see lots of elephants, but it seems they have deserted us for now. But I think we're going to head over to Nkoro, and it sounds like we might have a hippopotamus lolling around in the muddy water with what I assume to be an oxpecker on its back. That's not something you see all the time. We often see things like storks and herons hitching a ride. But with the water drying up this time of year, this particular hippo is somewhat exposed and a perfect opportunity for the oxpeckers to come down and grab a little meal of the little ectoparasites that will be living in his skin. I say his, it could be her, but more likely a he on the basis that he is on his own. I'm just wondering if that's something in the background. Is that the head of a crocodile we can see there, or is that just a little bit of something in the water? Not sure. I think it's moving. Maybe a croc. Or a really, really small hippo. So I'm not so sure now. Is it an optical illusion? But definitely oxpeckers. Look at them having a little root around in those flaps of skin. And just look at the thickness of that skin as well. Up to about 2 inches thick, a hippo's skin. Very, very solid. Makes a very, very solid leather as well. Okay, well, let's have another look. It may have just been some bubbles as opposed to a crocodile. I don't think we actually do get crocs here. Oh, you're alive, Mr. Hippo. Good. Get these oxpeckers enjoying a little feast whilst they can, but also see the amount of scars and damage that's been done to this poor hippo's back. It's quite normal in hippo society. I always find them a bit of an enigma. They are a social animal, but they seem to loathe one another's company. They're forever bickering, and they're always good entertainment. I remember when I was working up in Tanzania for a year or so, many years back now, we used to go to a place called Paradise Plains, and when the dry season was beginning to kick in and that waterhole started to dry up and just became a rather fetid pool of mud, we would have literally hundreds of hippos crammed in like sardines, constantly scrapping with one another. And those razor sharp teeth, I'm sure you've all seen a hippo yawn, got those massive incisors, the tips of which are kept sharp every time they close their mouth. They sort of rub against one another, a little bit like rubbing or sharpening a knife on a steel. And they are razor sharp, those edges, and they have a tendency to sort of slash at each other and they can cause huge damage. But very, very rarely will you find a hippo with any sort of infection because of their incredibly sophisticated mechanism of dealing with that. They have special glands in the skin that produce hippocyritic acid and norhippocyritic acid, which often goes a sort of a pinkish color in the sun, hence why it's often colloquially known as blood sweat, is chocked full of antibacterial properties and stops any bacteria from growing in those wounds. Yeah, I think just a little bit of the back, not a crocodile after all that. Linda, it would be lovely to make a deeper spot for this male so he could get completely submerged. And I'm sorry you're sad that he's getting pecked out. But say they are doing well, they're doing a good job and not a good job. Yes, they are potentially keeping those wounds open, which could lead to secondary infection. But as we've just said, they have a remarkable ability to deal with bacterial buildup in any injuries. So we'll give the oxpeckers the benefit of the doubt in that they are just giving him a good groom. But he does look like quite an old hippo. Some interesting markings around the eyes there. I'm not sure if that's a pigmentation issue or if it's just a trick of the light because the sun is at a funny angle for us at the moment. But that's a hippo that has seen much during his long life, I would think. Around about 40 odd years or so life expectancy for a hippo. Enjoying some of his twilight years. You can see those lovely long nostrils when he lifts his nose up there as well. You can sometimes see that on their tracks. If you find hippo tracks of one who's been out and about in the evening, find out oxpeckers. You'll often find they sort of drag their muzzle close to the floor, and you can actually see the imprints of those very, very stiff hairs, those whiskers, also in the sand. A nice bit of sign to look out for out in the bush. JJ, you're wanting to know whether a hippo could drown. Absolutely. It requires oxygen, like many, many things. They can hold their breath for a decent amount of time, much longer than you or I. Around about 5 to 6 minutes would be really putting a bit of strain on the lungs of a hippo. Anything more than that, and yeah, it would be in big trouble. So it does need oxygen, capable of holding its breath for a while, but not all that long if you compare it to something like a crocodile, which could maybe even go over an hour under the right circumstances when the crocodile is very stationary and not putting any metabolic stress on its body. But yeah, around about 5 minutes on average for a hippo. You can see when they're asleep as well. They do sleep with their heads under the water sometime, but every 45 seconds, almost said minutes, every 45 seconds or so, unconsciously, whilst the hippo is asleep, just like you and I continue to breathe whilst we're asleep, unless you're suffering from sleep apnea or some other unfortunate condition. Um, Automatically the hippo will just raise his nostrils up to the surface and just take a gulp of air and then carry on sleeping. But digging a new spot for the hippo, Linda, would be a bit tricky. You'd have to make sure that the hippo wasn't there, for one thing. Um, and unfortunately, as harsh as it is sort of the natural way of things. In drier seasons, water holes dry up. That forces animals to move to other areas, which then in turn allows that area a little bit of a chance to recover because the animals don't come to it. So I know it is a little bit harsh at times, but ecologically, for the benefit of the entire area, which can then go on to support a large number and diversity of species, it is a natural process of waterholes drying up and then filling up again during the wet seasons, during the summer rains. Of course, it's one of the big problems that we have with regulating waterholes. We have a lot of lodges that put waterholes in front of their lodges to attract animals, but that means that the game then doesn't have to disperse, and that puts a lot of pressure on not only the vegetation but even also the soil in certain areas. As I go to say, you can hear a Birchall starling calling. Yes, a very characteristic noise. But not much else happening at Nkoro, but lovely open plains and these beautiful trees, knobthorns, and a couple of marulas that we've seen as we've been panning past. Very iconic of African savanna landscape. And a close up of possibly a leopard. Just nice to get a real 360 view of these areas, but just surprisingly quiet considering the clear skies. I have to say, in this area, I'm in Hoedspruit, which is not too far away from Nkoro, maybe about 80 kilometers as the crow flies. It's not super warm today, but surprising to see so few animals around. It gives you a good idea of the surrounding landscape. You can see a lot of those knobthorns are potentially no longer with us, having been ring-barked by elephants, taking off the bark after that cambium layer, that reddish layer, sort of the inner bark of a tree, which contains all the transportation systems for circulating the sugars post photosynthesis. There's a lot of damage of that, and they particularly get hammered at sort of the end of winter, knobthorns, because they're one of the first trees to start pumping extra energy into those limbs to facilitate the new blossoms that will come. They're one of the first trees to blossom when spring arrives. All rather quiet in Corrie, but that's all right. I think we are going to head down towards the Eastern Cape part of the country, and let's go and have a look. I think there might be some Egyptian geese at the water. Well, here's the beautiful views of Mantis Founder's Lodge. we did have some Egyptian geese. I'm not sure if they are still around, but I love this waterhole. It's a beautiful viewpoint we get, and we've seen some lovely animals drinking here over the months. Catherine, a great place to go on your first safari. Well, there are so many options. Assuming that budget is not an issue, because it's a bit like anything, you can go low budget or you can go to the ridiculous extremes of opulence out on a luxury safari holiday. I would say personally, I would say anywhere in and around the Kruger area is lovely. Self-drive and camping within Kruger National Park and doing it all yourself is wonderful. But if you've never been before, then I would strongly recommend you go with a guide of some description, A, to help you um, with understanding what you're seeing, but perhaps more importantly, to sort of show you the ropes in terms of how to act appropriately, particularly when approaching or being approached by what we would consider potentially dangerous game, things like elephants and lions, certainly. So I would say, yeah, anywhere within the Greater Kruger region would be a very good place to start, depending on your budget. Once you've been a few times and you're comfortable with it, and maybe you've got some of the sort of the basic knowledge, then there is nothing more enjoyable for me than just taking a drive around the Kruger National Park on your own. Do things at your own time, don't have to worry about other people. And if you want to sit and watch birds for half an hour, you can do without the sort of the pressure of worrying that other people might want to go and find something else. So that would be my suggestion, but it's a good idea to go and do it yourself at some point as well. So we've had a few more people join us. Rolling Trouble, glad you made it all the way from Washington. And April Owl, April Owl, there we go. Sorry, misread that one. And you're in sunny Connecticut. Catherine, middle of the range budget. Well, then I think, yeah, somewhere in the Greater Kruger area, Timbabati, Klaseri, Balule, any of those sorts of areas. If you can find somewhere within budget within the Sabi Sands, then fantastic. But all of those areas should give you a nice varied selection of things to see. The nice thing about South Africa, particularly the Kruger area, is whilst it may not hold the enormous density of animals that you might expect from, say, the Great Migrations in East Africa, what we do have down here is because of the lots of different ecosystems that we have, the different biomes that sort of overlap, the different geologies, is that we sport a very good diversity in terms of species numbers out here. So good chance to see lots of different things down here. And so, usually, very, very good guides in those areas, and they will give you a very good introduction in terms of the basic understanding of what you're looking at. And some really interesting background, particularly if the guide's been there for a little while, can give you a little bit of history about the particular animals and the history of the area, both from an ecological and from a cultural perspective, because a lot of this area is reclaimed land, and there are some lovely stories behind it, and sometimes not so lovely stories, I should add. Oh, photobombed by an Egyptian goose. But yeah, it's not to forget the cultural aspect of a safari trip as well. Look at those beautiful cloud arrangements, these straight lines of cirrus clouds. Little ice crystals right up in the top of our atmosphere. And one day I want to photograph that tree with the night sky behind it. I keep looking at that tree and thinking it's so perfect there with the rock as well, makes for a very interesting foreground. I can pretty much guarantee you Egyptian geese wherever you go. They are very, very common birds. but often overlooked. Beautiful in their own right, the markings that they've got. There's little patches around the eyes, and there's little reflective patterns on the wings. We've zoomed all the way up to East Africa to Oldonyo, and look at all the little helmeted guinea fowls running around there. One of my favourites. Very comical to watch. Catherine, do I have a bucket list for safari destinations? Oh, there are so many, Catherine. Honestly, it very much depends on what you want to see. I suppose everybody should witness the Great Migration once, which is rich coming from me because I never have. Despite having worked in Tanzania, I was the opposite end of the country, and it was about a 2 day drive to get up to that area, and I wasn't there at the right period of time. Um, I've got this thing I'd really like to go to South Luangwa, which I haven't got to yet. Otherwise, Kruger, particularly the Sabi Sands, in terms of leopards and things, but probably the best place in the world you could go to try and view a leopard in the Sabi Sands. Um, where else? Well, I have to say, having been down in Shamwari in the Eastern Cape recently, I really enjoyed that as well from a different habitat perspective. I'm sure there are many others, to be honest. North of Kruger as well, the northern tip of Kruger, maybe not the best place for game viewing, but some spectacular vistas there and loads of massive baobab trees. I do love these helmeted guinea fowl. Very occasionally in this area, we do get the crested guinea fowl, and right up in the north of Kruger, you'll get crested guinea fowl as well. They're very funny. They instead of having those sort of big casques that you can see on the head of this group, they have got these sort of great big mops on the top of their heads. They look like um, giant big tufts of hair. They're one of my favourites, actually, the old crested guinea fowl. And then you also get a vulturine guinea fowl, although I can't remember exactly where they occur, but they are an interesting looking bird. Sorry, it seems we had a couple of issues with the camera there. Old to Mabulla, so more sort of in the mid-northern part of the country. And we've got what looks to be a wattled lapwing. You can see the stripes on his neck there, and obviously those telltale wattles on the side of the beak there. Oop, and a little head of a terrapin just popped up. Did that give you a fright, Mr. Lapwing, or were you looking at something else? Definitely a bit of a disturbance in the water there, maybe the terrapin catching something. Don't see any sort of hunting behaviour at the moment. I think he was just having a nice little rest, possibly disturbed by something. But strange, I don't often see them just sort of sitting in the water. They're normally out on the banks. But you'll often find them probing around in the mud on the shores of waterholes, looking for little arthropods, but they'll also eat termites and beetles and locusts and grasshoppers, anything really they can get their hand on from an invertebrate perspective. Bowl of kittens, what a lovely name. You were commenting on those stunning skies at Founders. They really are beautiful. It was lovely to see those cirrus clouds above the dam there. And Carew, you're also agreeing that Vulturine guinea fowl are beautiful. They certainly look it from the pictures, but not one that I've ticked off the list yet. And JJ, yes, I am a big birder, or I certainly was. I still am. I'm just a little bit out of practice at the moment. Having spent a little bit of time overseas the last year, my birding is a little bit rusty. But yeah, very big birder. I don't go very many places without my binoculars slung over my shoulders, and will regularly be having a conversation with somebody, and they continue walking and talking, and I've got very distracted, staring off into the bushes somewhere or onto the horizon, trying to focus whatever the tiny little thing is in my binoculars. But I try and keep bird lists for all the different reserves that I go to. I keep a life list. And I like to think I'm doing quite well. I'm on, what am I on now? About 590 different species in southern Africa. But I also have a bird list for New Zealand, where I've spent a little bit of time, and also in the UK, where I'm from. So, in terms of a sort of an entire life list, probably around closing in on 750 to 800, I would think. I think we'll leave our little lapwing to his ablutions, having a good clean and a good groom, and we're going to head back down to Tembe. Impalas and the yellow-billed storks. Where Zygote has also pointed out, we do see crested guinea fowl. Of course, yes, in KwaZulu-Natal they do occur, but so the only place you'll get them in Kruger is right up in the north. I did see one once in the Sabi Sands, literally just one individual who often obviously got very, very lost, hung around for about a week and then never saw it again. But very prevalent in Mozambique and down the eastern coast, and some of the way down into the Eastern Cape. There are little populations. I've just had to check my app to check the distribution. But thank you, Zygote. I've never seen a crested guinea fowl at Tembe, but would be very cool if we ever did. The little birds flitting around there, very difficult to see exactly what they are. Bronze mannequins, possibly, but hard to tell. That would be my guess, just from what looks like a little brown head and a bit of brown on the back. Lovely to see some impalas as well. So often, in terms of safari goers, are often sort of dismissed as being overtly common and everywhere, and we have a tendency to drive past them. But I often say this, but I honestly believe this. Oh, there's a brown-hooded kingfisher just landed in the top left. I honestly believe they're one of the prettiest mammals that we have out here. If you actually stop and get out your binoculars and look at an impala, the way that their fur shines, their beautiful big brown eyes, the horns of the males, they are really spectacular looking animals. And so hugely successful. There's a reason I always say to people when people go, oh, it's another dove or another impala. Well, think about why. Why are there so many? It's because they're exceptionally good at what they do. They are hugely successful. That habit of eating uh, both browse and graze, so eating of leaves and little twigs, and also grass means they have so much food availability for them, their breeding habits, their way of grooming one another and each other with their specialized teeth structures or tooth structure to remove ticks and parasites keeps them in excellent condition. So never underestimate an impala. It sounds like you might have a little bit of mammalian activity back up at Oldonio. Possibly those guinea fowl have made some space. Let's go take a look at what's arrived. Hey, we've got a beautiful giraffe who's trying to pick a path through the guinea fowl and has called in the zebra for some backup. Two of Africa's, or three of Africa's most iconic species, perhaps. Guinea fowl, say, somewhat ubiquitous as well. You find them all over, always amusing to watch. And who doesn't love a giraffe and a zebra? Two of the most unusual and unique, fascinating animals that we see out here. And so, despite not being in any sort of big five or similarly touristic listing characteristic, they are still at the top of everybody's list. Everybody wants to see a zebra and a giraffe, and it's unsurprising. Oh, you can hear the guinea fowl. Sounds like a rusty wheelbarrow being pushed. That's how I always used to remember a guinea fowl. Some hurdling, bit of leapfrogging. April owl, are guinea fowls related to turkeys? I honestly don't know, but I would imagine to some extent, although I'm not sure how closely related, but they would be both be considered non-passerines, which is one of the sort of ways we divide birds up in terms of their foot structure. They don't have a sort of a the ability to perch, and they're not songbirds per se, which we would consider passerines to be. But yes, I don't know officially April Owl, but I imagine somewhere down their lineage they would share a common ancestor, but certainly not the same genus, and I wouldn't have thought the same family. Good morning, I love bee bears from Louisville, Kentucky. Welcome, and welcome to some zebras and some giraffes and some guinea fowl at Oldonyo up in Kenya, part of the Great Plains Conservation Lodges, of course. Stunning area, lots of volcanic rock in this area, but not much in terms, or any in terms of perennial water. So these little artificial water points are very important in this area. The zebra's going to brave the guinea fowl barrier. I don't know how many guinea fowl are here. There's hundreds of them. Beautiful pose, just struck by the one at the back there. Very regal. But they look a little bit nervous. There are often some sort of people around the waterhole here at Oldona. You can see that ears pricking up and definitely didn't just stroll down and have a drink. So there must be something just attracting their attention in the background. Everybody looks a little bit jumpy. Yeah, sorry everyone. It looks like the camera had a little bit of an issue there. So we have gone to, well, I'm not quite sure where we are now. We're at Jabani. Okay, so we've come back down to South Africa. And how cool is this? We've got a terrapin and a little baby water monitor. That's not something you see every day. Both of them taking advantage of that little bit of concrete there to warm up in the cooler winter temperatures. I don't think I've ever seen a terrapin and a water monitor sharing the same vantage point. They're both doing it for the same reason. Both reptiles, both cold-blooded, both trying to absorb some of this mid-afternoon or late afternoon sunshine. Pindy Tulipa, who think guinea fowl look two-dimensional because they're so skinny. Shame on you. I suppose it depends on the angle that you look at them at, but I always find something they're always good value to sit and watch guinea fowl for a while, often chasing each other around, and very important for the environment as well. They also eat a lot of ticks. That's one of the favourite things they eat, so they could be considered a controlling mechanism of ticks. They obviously won't eat them off other animals like the oxpeckers do, but ticks on the grass, for example, will be hoovered up by guinea fowl, and it is a noticeable thing if you've got no guinea fowl in your area, better chance of more ticks being around. Speaking of tick controlling mechanisms, of course, um, the terrapin very famous for that. So when things like buffalo or rhino come down to drink, you'll often see the terrapins suddenly rushing towards that animal, and they'll go and nibble on the ticks that are on the animal's lower legs and sort of knees, maybe even up to the armpits, depending on how deep the animal goes in, because that's where you'll find most of the ticks, of course, in those more sheltered areas of the skin. And water monitors do their thing for the environment as well. They're a controlling mechanism of crocodile eggs. They're responsible for digging up many crocodile nests and feasting on. Well, I think we're going to head back up to Old Donyo again in Kenya, and we'll hope that the camera's a little bit more stable because it sounds like we've upped the ante. We've gone from guinea fowl to zebra to giraffe to something even bigger. Evidently, everyone was waiting for the elephant to move all the guinea fowl from the area. But a lone bull come down for a drink. Everybody else taking the opportunity as well. What an amazing sight that is. Elephant and zebra. It's often pointed out that we don't see many breeding herds or any breeding herds here at Old Donyo. It always seems to be bulls, but again, that's to do with the lack of perennial water in this area, I would imagine. When you've got calves, little ones that don't want to have to hike over massive distances between water sources, most of them will stay in the surrounding areas where you have more access to seasonal rivers or rivers and waterholes and floodplains that are far better at producing water. And when you've only got, say, minimal opportunity here, it makes sense to not really come to this area. But the bulls, they roam far and wide. There's obviously plenty of food here. But I don't think I've ever seen a breeding herd of elephants at Old Onyo. I've just said that occasionally we get breeding herds, but it is very rare. I would imagine that would coincide with more of the rainy period. I think in the drier times, all the breeding herds migrate to where the water is a little bit more prevalent and easy to come by. But a very relaxed scene here. Often at Old Jonya, you see the other animals are a little bit dubious of the elephants when there's a few of them, but obviously just one coming down has not perturbed the zebras. But he looks very relaxed, this big old elephant bull. Except his ears are out, whether he's giving those zebras a good look. I think he's just happens to be the way he's standing at the moment. He seems to be quite happy fiddling around in the water there. It's nice to see them head on like that. So this time of year especially, with not getting much moisture from what they're eating, looking at potentially for a big elephant bull of this size, putting down a good 150 litres of water or so a day, that's an awful lot of water that is required. Seems to be sort of flicking between having a drink and just having a little bit of a standing doze, I think. A very relaxed bull. You see a little bit of secretion from his temporal gland just on that one side that we can see. You can see a little bit of darker skin that's been stained. So that's the gland responsible, or I should say, is indicative of a raise in testosterone levels. There's a gland under the skin there, about the size of a fist. But when an elephant comes into full must, that will expand to much larger size and give off, say, lots of these sort of hormones, or what we call temperin, that you often see streaming down the face of a bull in full must. It's a bit of a misconception that females don't display this. They certainly do. But it's normally considered a state of heightened emotion is the best sort of description, I think, in females. So you often see it if they're particularly happy or particularly stressed about something. You'll see all the females will also start to secrete that fluid from the side of their head. And there is a thought that when an elephant is in must and becomes potentially more aggressive, yes, it's a massive increase in testosterone levels. Some say up to sort of 40 to 60 times greater than normal, but it is thought that that puts a lot of pressure at the base of the tusk and around the eye and actually causes the elephant to have rather uncomfortable headaches. And it's not unusual to see a musting elephant sort of tusking at the ground, which could be seen as a form of displacement behavior, a form of aggression, and a visual cue. But some people suggest it might be just sort of manipulating the roots of the trunk to alleviate some of that pressure as well. Mindy Tillipau, I'm glad you have enjoyed today's show. It's been a quiet start and then a lovely finish with this big bull. Look at those lovely soft eyes. Hello, big boy. You can see that little bit of white at the front of his eye, the equivalent of tears, basically. That's what we call the Harderian gland, which just helps to lubricate the eyeball where that nictitating membrane swipes across it like a windscreen wiper every so often. But alas, that's pretty much all we've got time for, unfortunately. 45 minutes has flown by. So, to all of you who've joined, I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your questions and your comments. And I look forward to joining you all again at some point in the not too distant future. But what a lovely view to finish on of this elephant bull having a drink at Old Donio.